All right, let's talk about my guy William Paley, a major philosopher and theologian from the 1700s who had some fascinating takes on how Islam and Christianity spread. In his book, A View of the Evidences of Christianity, he laid out some of the key differences that are still worth chatting about today. Both Muslims and Christians argue that the success of their faith spread supports its truth, so let's dive into what Paley had to say about that. As a staunch evidentialist, Paley noticed something off about Muhammad. Unlike Jesus, he didn't claim to do any of those classic eye-popping miracles that you can see and prove. In Christianity, miracles are a huge deal, right? Even the Quran says that Jesus healed lepers and cured the blind and raised the dead. But when it comes to Muhammad, it's a totally different story. Even the Quran backs this up, saying things like, "The disbelievers say, 'Why is not a sign sent down to him from his Lord?' Say, 'You are only a warner.' Or, 'Nothing prevents us from sending signs except the former peoples denied them.' Or they say, 'Why has a sign not been sent down to him from his Lord?' Say, 'The signs are only with Allah, and I am only a clear warner. Is it not sufficient for them that we have revealed to you the book which is recited to them?'" Paley says that Muhammad was constantly asked by skeptics to show them some miracles, but he never claimed to be able to do any. Instead, he said that miracles were something only God could do. He even pointed out that when prophets in the past did perform miracles, people often didn't believe them anyway. Muhammad's big thing was that the Quran itself was the real miracle for everyone. He wrote, "And if you are in doubt as to that which we have revealed to our servant, then produce a chapter like it and call on your witnesses besides Allah if you are truthful. But if you do it not, and never shall you do it, then be on your guard against the fire of which men and stones are the fuel. It is prepared for the unbelievers." Now, it's worth mentioning that modern scholars don't really agree with Muhammad's claim here. This guy, Ali Dashti, a scholar from Iran, wrote a book called 23 Years, where he basically says the Quran isn't all that amazing in terms of language. He writes, "The Quran contains sentences which are incomplete and not fully intelligible without the aid of commentaries, foreign words, unfamiliar Arabic words, and words used with other than normal meaning, adjectives and verbs inflected without observance of the concords of gender and number, illogically and ungrammatically applied pronouns which sometimes have no referent, and predicates which in rhyme passages are often remote from the subjects. These and other such aberrations in the language have given scope to critics who deny the Quran's eloquence. Literary excellence, at best, is way too subjective of a claim to miracles." Paley also pointed out this one part in the Quran in the 54th chapter that might be talking about a visible miracle. It says, "The hour has drawn near and the moon was split in two. Whenever they see a sign, they turn away saying same old magic." But this is where things get a little bit tricky. While many Muslims think this is talking about an actual literal miracle where the moon is split in half, others think that it's more about an eschatological sign, or others think that it's just a weird thing that happened to the moon that Muhammad used to make his point. Since it's not super clear what this passage means, Paley thinks that maybe Muhammad was using this weird moon thing to back up his message, even if it wasn't a straight-up miracle. And get this, there just aren't any reliable contemporary witnesses or details that really back up this whole moon-splitting thing. Now, Paley was living back in the 1700s, and sure, we've come a long way since then, especially with science taking giant leaps forward. And guess what? Science hasn't exactly been rolling out the red carpet for Islam's claims here. NASA's Brad Bailey says that there's zero evidence to show that the moon ever cracked open and then got patched back up. Now, there are later stories outside the Quran about Muhammad and miracles, but Paley is pretty clear that we shouldn't take those later miracle stories too seriously. These stories in the Hadith were not written down until many generations later, likely invented by followers to glorify their leader long after Islam had spread through conquest, and they contradict Muhammad's own words in the Quran. He repeatedly stated that he was simply a warner and couldn't perform miracles. And when you look at Islamic history, it's pretty clear that Muhammad did not prioritize things like miraculous healings. When the early Muslims settled in Medina, they were struck down by a fever, and Muhammad didn't pray for their recovery. Instead, according to Ibn Ishaq, Muhammad noticed some people sitting during prayers and told them, "Know that the prayer of the sitter is only half as valuable as the prayer of the stander." Despite their weakness, the Muslims painfully got to their feet to pray. The Hadith even recounts Muhammad's own two sons, Al-Qasim and Ibrahim, died in childhood without divine intervention. If miracles were a significant part of his mission, you think that he would have prayed to save his own son. Contrast this with the Gospels, which are packed with stories of Jesus healing the sick and raising the dead. Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law from a fever. He cured an official's dying son, and even brought a widow's son back from the dead. Unlike Muhammad, who couldn't save his own sons, Jesus made a habit of restoring life and health to those in need. This is part of why he drew such large crowds and attracted so much attention. So it's pretty obvious that these miracle accounts later in Islam are more like religious folklore than historical fact, while Jesus' miracles are part of the very fabric of Christianity. Even more modern-day liberal biblical scholars like Marcus Borg acknowledge that Jesus was known as a healer and exorcist and drew large crowds because of it. Paley's big takeaway is this: a religion can totally spread without miracles like Islam did, but that's not the same as a religion like Christianity, where miracles are basically the whole point. The fact that Muhammad didn't do any miracles but kept talking about miracles done by prophets in the Bible from the past shows Paley that it's super hard, maybe even impossible, to start a religion based on miracles if you don't actually have any real ones. While both Christianity and Islam gained huge followings, their paths to success were drastically different. Paley doesn't hold back when highlighting the harsh contrasts. In the Quran, the depiction of hellfire for those who refuse to submit is pretty intense. It reads, "For those who deny their Lord, a garment of fire will be cut out for them. Boiling water will be poured over their heads, scalding their bodies and skin. Iron maces will punish them, and every time they try to escape the torment, they'll be forced back with the words, 'Taste the penalty of burning.'" It's a fierce, no-holds-barred image meant to keep believers in line, way more graphic than the New Testament's approach. But Muhammad also knew how to dangle a carrot. He allowed his followers up to 4 wives, and the freedom to swap them out basically as they please. The Quran justifies this by saying, "God is minded to make his religion light unto you, for man was created weak." This stands in stark contrast to the Christian gospel, where it says that whoever looks upon a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Paley says that it's clear that Islam's rapid spread wasn't just about faith, it was also about the promise of conquest, wealth, in a very specific and rather carnal kind of paradise. He points out Muhammad's military victories were seen as the proof of God's favor, making his message an offer you really can't refuse. For idolaters, their options were pretty cut and dry. As the Quran puts it, strike off their heads, strike off the ends of their fingers, kill the idolaters wherever you find them. Jews and Christians had a slightly better deal, but not by much. They could keep their religion if they paid a tax and accepted second-class status. Otherwise, they had to convert to get the same rights and privileges as Muslims. Compare that to Christianity's humble beginnings and emphasis on sacrifice. While both religions may have had a huge impact on the world, their paths to success couldn't be more different. Look, if Allah of the Quran is real, and our eternal fate depends on what we do with Muhammad's message, you'd think that Allah would give us some clear proof that this message is really from him. I mean, how do we know that it's not just a guy spinning a yarn? The gold standard for proving divine revelation has always been a miracle, something that screams, this is straight from God. But what did Muhammad offer? Basically, write some rhymes as good as mine. Not exactly convincing evidence. And all the later accounts of miracles from Muhammad are from later hadiths that contradict what Muhammad himself said. Muslims, let's just be real for a second. Your faith just doesn't have the same kind of evidential backing that you find in Christianity, the kind of evidence that Paley wrote about for many, many chapters. Christianity has evidential miracles, things that you can actually dig into and verify. So why not take a closer look? You might find a lot more than you expected.